In the bustling city of Brookfield, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and streets buzzed with life, tensions often simmered beneath the surface. It was a place where diversity thrived, but misunderstandings could ignite like sparks in dry grass. On this particular morning, Detective Mark Harris, a white police officer known for his strict adherence to rules, began his shift with a sense of duty that bordered on arrogance. Mark had been patrolling the downtown area for years, believing he knew every corner, every face, and every potential troublemaker. His confidence sometimes blinded him to nuance, making him quick to judge based on appearances. That morning, as he sipped coffee from a styrofoam cup while leaning against his patrol car, he noticed someone walking briskly down the street, a tall black man in an impeccably tailored suit. The man carried himself with authority, his polished, leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the pavement. He seemed out of place among the casual attire of passers-by. To Mark, something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he glanced at his watch or how he avoided eye contact when passing strangers. In Mark's mind, these small details painted a picture of someone up to no good. Unbeknownst to Mark, the man was Special Agent Marcus Reed, one of the most respected figures within the FBI. Marcus had spent over 2 decades climbing the ranks, earning accolades for solving high-profile cases and dismantling criminal networks. Today, however, he wasn't wearing his badge or carrying his gun. Instead, he was dressed as a civilian, meeting a confidential informant near the park. Time was critical. Lives depended on the information he hoped to gather. As Marcus approached the corner store where the meet was supposed to take place, Mark stepped forward, blocking his path. "Hold it right there," Mark said sharply, his tone leaving little room for negotiation. "Where are you headed? You seem in a hurry." Marcus paused, taken aback by the sudden confrontation. He looked at the officer, noting the stern expression and rigid posture. For a moment he considered flashing his credentials, but protocol dictated discretion during undercover operations. Besides, he thought, surely this would blow over quickly if he cooperated. "I'm just running late for a meeting," Marcus replied calmly, his deep voice steady. "No need to worry." But Mark wasn't satisfied. Something about the man's calm demeanor irked him. Why wasn't he more flustered, more defensive? Mark decided to push further. "Do you have ID?" "Let me see it." Marcus hesitated before pulling out his wallet. As he handed over his driver's license, he locked eyes with Mark, searching for any sign of recognition. There was none. This young officer clearly had no idea who he was dealing with. Mark glanced at the ID, then back at Marcus. "Reed, huh? Well, Mr. Reed, I'll need you to step aside for a moment." He gestured toward the side of the road, implying a more thorough questioning. For Marcus, this was not just inconvenient. It was humiliating. Here he was, a decorated agent whose work had saved countless lives, being treated like a common suspect. Yet he reminded himself of the bigger picture. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone, not today. Little did either man know this encounter would set off a chain of events neither could foresee. While Mark clung to his assumptions, Marcus wrestled with frustration and restraint. What started as a routine stop was about to become far more complicated and transformative for both of them. As Marcus stood beside the patrol car, his mind raced with frustration and disbelief. He had faced dangerous criminals, solved complex cases, and navigated life-threatening situations, yet here he was, being questioned like a suspect by an officer who didn't even know his name. Mark's tone grew increasingly accusatory, each word dripping with suspicion. "Why are you dressed so formally if you're just going to a meeting?" Mark asked, his arms crossed as he studied Marcus closely. "People around here don't usually walk around in suits unless they're trying to look important." Marcus clenched his jaw but forced himself to stay calm. He knew better than to escalate the situation. "Officer," he said evenly, "I'm simply heading to a business engagement. I assure you, there's nothing suspicious about me or my intentions." Mark wasn't convinced. "Business engagement, huh? Then why won't you tell me where exactly you're going, or who you're meeting?" The question hung heavy in the air. Marcus couldn't reveal the truth without jeopardizing his mission and possibly endangering lives. But his silence only fueled Mark's skepticism. To the officer, it seemed like evasiveness, further confirming his suspicions. "I don't have time for this," Marcus finally said, his patience wearing thin. "If you'll excuse me, I need to leave." But Mark stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. "Not so fast. You're not going anywhere until I get some answers." Passers-by began to notice the exchange. A small crowd gathered, murmuring among themselves. Some watched with concern, while others whispered judgments about what they saw. A black man being detained by a white police officer. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, knowing how easily this scene could be misinterpreted. For Mark, however, the growing audience only heightened his determination to assert control. He believed he was doing his job, protecting the community from potential threats. Yet deep down, there was another layer to his actions, a subconscious bias he hadn't fully acknowledged. In his mind, Marcus's polished appearance and composed demeanor clashed with his preconceived notions of innocence. "You think you can intimidate me into letting you go?" Mark asked, his tone laced with defiance. "That's not how this works." Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself that losing his temper would only make things worse. "Officer Harris," he said firmly, using the name on Mark's badge, "you're making a mistake. If you'd let me explain." "A mistake?" Mark interrupted, his voice sharp. "No, you're the one acting suspiciously. Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to play games with me." The tension between them was palpable. Marcus wanted nothing more than to pull out his FBI credentials and put an end to the ordeal, but protocol forbade it. Every second that passed brought him closer to missing his informant and putting both of their lives at risk. Meanwhile, Mark's confidence grew. He patted Marcus down, searching for anything incriminating. When he found nothing but a wallet, keys, and a folded piece of paper, his frustration mounted. What was written on the paper? Could it be evidence of wrongdoing, or was it harmless? "What's this?" Mark demanded, holding up the note. Marcus hesitated, then decided honesty might defuse the situation. "It's an address for my meeting." Mark frowned, unconvinced. He stared at Marcus, trying to gauge whether he was lying. For all his training, Mark couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. And yet, the longer the confrontation dragged on, the more uneasy he began to feel. Was he overstepping, or was he right to trust his instincts? Unbeknownst to either of them, their standoff was being recorded by someone in the crowd. A young woman with her phone held high captured every moment, unaware of the ripple effect her video would soon create. What started as a routine traffic stop was now becoming public spectacle, and neither man could predict the consequences. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus realized he had two choices: continue enduring the humiliation, or find a way to reclaim control. Little did he know, his decision would challenge not only Mark's assumptions, but also his own understanding of justice and respect. The seconds felt like hours as Marcus and Mark remained locked in their tense standoff. The growing crowd whispered louder, some shaking their heads in disapproval while others recorded the scene on their phones. For Marcus, the weight of the situation pressed down on him, not just because he was being detained unjustly, but because every passing moment brought him closer to missing his crucial meeting with the informant. Lives were at stake, and yet here he stood, powerless against an officer who refused to listen. Mark, meanwhile, felt a mix of frustration and unease. He had expected Marcus to break under pressure, perhaps admit to something incriminating or show signs of guilt. But instead, Marcus remained calm, composed, and frustratingly unreadable. That composure only fueled Mark's suspicion further. "You're hiding something," Mark said firmly, his voice carrying a hint of accusation. "No one stays this cool unless they've got something to hide." Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Officer Harris," he said, his tone measured but firm, "I understand you're doing your job, but you're wasting time, both yours and mine. I've done nothing wrong." "Then, why won't you give me straight answers?" Mark shot back, his patience wearing thin. If you're so innocent, why does everything about you feel off? The words stung Marcus more than he cared to admit. He wasn't just hearing Mark's words, he was hearing decades of prejudice wrapped up in them. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him based on his appearance, but it rarely failed to leave a bitter taste in his mouth. Still, he reminded himself that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "I've already told you everything you need to know," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "But if you insist on continuing the charade, I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter." Mark raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his face. "Escalate? What does that even mean? You think calling someone is going to scare me off?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at his watch again, his jaw tightening. Time was slipping away, and with it, the chance to prevent a potential tragedy. His mind raced, weighing his options. Should he reveal his identity, now risking exposure and compromising his mission? Or should he endure the humiliation a little longer, hoping Mark would eventually let him go? Before Marcus could decide, a voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" A middle-aged man from the crowd stepped forward, his expression concerned. "This gentleman hasn't done anything wrong. Why are you harassing him?" Mark turned to the man, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Sir, this is police business. Please stay out of it." But the interruption only emboldened others in the crowd. "Yeah, we're watching," another person called out. "We've got cameras rolling. You better have a good reason for this." Mark glanced around, suddenly aware of how many people were filming. For the first time since the encounter began, doubt crept into his mind. Was he overreacting? Had he misread the situation entirely? Yet admitting that possibility felt like conceding defeat, a blow to his pride he wasn't ready to accept. Marcus noticed the shift in Mark's demeanor. Sensing an opening, he spoke again, his tone softer but still resolute. "Officer, I don't want any trouble. All I ask is that you let me go so I can attend my meeting. If you're worried, you can follow me there. But please don't delay this any longer." Mark hesitated, torn between his instincts and the mounting pressure from the crowd. Finally, he relented, but not without one last jab. "Fine," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "Go ahead. But if I find out you're lying, you'll regret it." Marcus nodded curtly, resisting the urge to say more. As he walked away, the crowd parted to let him through, their murmurs following him like shadows. Some offered sympathetic nods, while others glared accusingly at Mark. For his part, Mark stood frozen, replaying the encounter in his head. Something about it gnawed at him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Unbeknownst to either man, the video of their confrontation was already spreading online, sparking debates about authority, bias, and justice. What started as a routine stop had become a flashpoint, one that neither Marcus nor Mark was prepared to face. As Marcus hurried toward his destination, he couldn't shake the bitterness of the experience. And Mark, left standing alone by his patrol car, found himself questioning whether he'd made the right call, or if he'd let his assumptions cloud his judgment by the time Marcus reached the park where his informant was supposed to meet him. He was nearly 10 minutes late. His heart pounded not just from the brisk walk but from the lingering frustration of his encounter with Mark. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of the person who held vital information about a human trafficking ring operating in the city, but there was no one. Just empty benches and scattered leaves blowing across the ground. Marcus cursed under his breath. The informant had likely waited as long as they could before leaving, fearing exposure or worse. Now, Marcus faced the grim reality that critical evidence might slip through his fingers, and lives could be lost because of it. As much as he tried to push aside his anger toward Mark, it simmered just beneath the surface, fueling his sense of urgency. Meanwhile, back on the street, Mark stood by his patrol car, staring at the retreating figures of the crowd. The confrontation, replayed in his mind like a loop, each detail magnified. Marcus's calm demeanor, the murmurs of disapproval from bystanders, and the subtle shift in his own confidence when people began recording. For years, Mark had prided himself on being a good officer, someone who upheld the law without bias. Yet now doubt crept into his thoughts. Had he acted fairly? Or had he let prejudice guide his actions? His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his reverie. It was a message from dispatch informing him about an incident report filed against him. Apparently, someone from the crowd had already contacted the department, accusing him of misconduct during the stop. Mark sighed heavily, feeling the weight of accountability settle over him. He knew such reports were part of the job, but this one felt different. This time he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that maybe, just maybe, he'd crossed a line. As the day wore on, the video of their encounter went viral. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, opinions, and heated debates. Some viewers defended Mark, arguing that officers must investigate suspicious behavior to keep communities safe. Others condemned his actions, calling them racially motivated and emblematic of systemic issues within law enforcement. Comments flooded in, dissecting every word, every gesture, every second captured on camera. For Marcus, the fallout hit unexpectedly. Back at FBI headquarters later that evening, his colleagues approached him with concern. "Did you see what's trending online?" asked Linda, a fellow agent and close friend. She handed him her phone, showing him clips of the altercation. "That's you, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "I didn't think anyone recorded it," he admitted quietly. "But yes, that's me." Linda studied him carefully. "Are you okay? You look upset." "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just frustrating, you know, being treated like a criminal when I'm trying to do my job." Linda placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't deserve that. No one does. But we need to decide how to handle this. If the public finds out you're FBI, it could blow your cover and jeopardize everything you've been working on." Marcus nodded again, understanding the gravity of the situation. Part of him wanted to step forward, reveal his identity, and expose the injustice he'd endured. But doing so would mean sacrificing months of undercover work and potentially putting his informant's life in danger. Instead, he chose to remain silent, for now. That night, both men lay awake, haunted by the events of the day. For Mark, guilt mingled with defensiveness. He replayed moments of the encounter, questioning whether he'd misjudged Marcus or if his instincts had truly been right all along. For Marcus, anger coexisted with determination. The humiliation still stung, but it only strengthened his resolve to bring down the criminals he'd been chasing. Neither man realized how intertwined their paths would become, or how the ripple effects of their confrontation would force them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world around them. The next morning, the city buzzed with conversations about the viral video. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of racial profiling in law enforcement. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice over bias and accountability now." Inside, Mark sat at his desk, avoiding eye contact with his colleagues. The weight of the scrutiny was suffocating. His captain called him into the office for a private meeting. Captain Rodriguez, a seasoned officer known for his fairness, leaned back in his chair and studied Mark carefully. "I've reviewed the footage," he began, his tone measured but firm, "and I need to know what happened from your perspective." Mark hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, I stopped him because something seemed off. His behavior, his appearance, everything. I thought I was doing my job." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I understand where you're coming from, Harris, but perception matters too. People see a black man in a suit being detained by a white officer, and they don't care about your intentions. They see bias. Did you consider that maybe you let assumptions cloud your judgment?" Mark opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. Deep down, he knew there was truth in Rodriguez's words. Still, admitting it felt like conceding defeat. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," he said quietly. "I just wanted answers." Rodriguez sighed. "Intentions are important, but so are actions. You're going to have to address this publicly if we want to rebuild trust. Are you ready for that?" Mark nodded reluctantly, though dread churned in his stomach. He had always prided himself on being a model officer, someone who followed the rules without question. Now those same rules were forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the system he served. Across town, Marcus was grappling with his own dilemma. At FBI headquarters, Director Hayes summoned him to discuss the fallout. "Agent Reed," Hayes said sternly, "this situation has spiraled beyond our control. If we reveal your identity now, it could compromise not only your mission but also public perception of the Bureau." Marcus understood the stakes but couldn't ignore the injustice he'd faced. "Sir, I appreciate the risks, but staying silent feels wrong. This isn't just about me, it's about accountability. If we don't speak up, nothing will change." Hayes rubbed his temples, visibly conflicted. "You're right, Marcus. Change is necessary, but timing is critical. We can't jeopardize months of work or lives for the sake of making a statement." After a long pause, Marcus agreed to remain undercover for now, but only under one condition. "If the opportunity arises to expose the truth safely, I want permission to act. Justice delayed shouldn't mean justice denied." Hayes reluctantly agreed, knowing Marcus's integrity was as unshakable as his resolve. That evening, fate intervened in an unexpected way. As Marcus prepared to meet another lead related to his case, he received an anonymous tip. It came in the form of a text message. "Check the docks tonight, they're moving cargo." The sender didn't identify themselves, but Marcus recognized the significance immediately. Human traffickers often used shipping containers to smuggle victims out of the country. This could be the break he needed. At the same time, Mark found himself assigned to patrol near the waterfront, a routine shift that felt anything but ordinary given recent events. As he drove through the dimly lit streets, his thoughts kept drifting back to the confrontation with Marcus. What if Rodriguez was right? What if he had misjudged the man entirely? Guilt gnawed at him, making it hard to focus. Unbeknownst to either of them, their paths were about to cross again, in a setting far more dangerous than either could have anticipated. The docks loomed ahead, shrouded in shadows and secrecy. Somewhere, within that maze of warehouses and shipping containers, criminals operated freely, unaware that two men, one driven by duty, the other by redemption, were closing in. As Marcus approached the area on foot, blending into the darkness, he spotted movement near a loading dock. Figures scurried around, unloading crates onto a waiting truck. His instincts kicked in, adrenaline sharpening his focus. Then in the distance he noticed flashing blue lights reflecting off the water. A patrol car had arrived. Mark stepped out of his vehicle, drawn by the suspicious activity. For a moment, neither man realized the other was nearby. But when they finally locked eyes across the dimly lit space, recognition dawned instantly. Both froze, caught between shock and disbelief. What started as a chance encounter was about to become a defining moment, not just for them, but for everyone involved. The air was thick with tension as Marcus and Mark stood frozen, their eyes locked across the dimly lit dock. For a moment neither spoke, each grappling with the surreal nature of their reunion in such a high-stakes environment. Then reality snapped back into focus. The sound of voices grew louder nearby, followed by the metallic clang of crates being loaded onto the truck. Time was running out. Marcus broke the silence first, his voice low but urgent. "Officer Harris," he said, stepping closer. "I don't know why you're here, but we don't have time for this. There's something bigger going on." Mark frowned, confusion mixing with suspicion. "What are you talking about, and why are you here?" Before Marcus could respond, footsteps echoed from behind a stack of crates. A group of men appeared, hauling heavy containers toward the waiting vehicle. One of them barked orders in a language neither Marcus nor Mark understood. Both men instinctively moved into the shadows, crouching low to avoid detection. Now shoulder to shoulder, they exchanged wary glances. "Look," Marcus whispered, his tone firm but controlled. "We can figure out our issues later. Right now these people are involved in human trafficking. If we act fast, we might be able to stop them." Mark hesitated, torn between skepticism and duty. He still didn't fully trust Marcus, or understand why he seemed so invested. But the urgency in the other man's voice was undeniable. More importantly, the scene unfolding before them confirmed one thing. Something illegal was happening here. "All right," Mark finally said, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you suggest?" Marcus nodded, appreciating the reluctant cooperation. "Stay close and follow my lead. I've dealt with situations like this before. We need to gather evidence without tipping them off." As they crept along the edge of the dock, staying hidden, among the shadows, Marcus explained what he knew about the operation based on his investigation. Mark listened intently, surprised by the depth of Marcus's knowledge and even more so by his calm professionalism under pressure. This wasn't the same man who had stood quietly during their earlier confrontation. This was someone entirely different, someone capable and commanding. Their teamwork began tentatively but quickly gained momentum. When one of the traffickers dropped a clipboard near a pile of crates, Marcus seized the opportunity. "Cover me," he murmured to Mark before darting forward to grab it. Mark watched nervously, ready to intervene if anyone noticed, but Marcus retrieved the item swiftly and melted back into the darkness. Back in their hiding spot, Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly grim. "This is it," he said softly, showing Mark the documents. "Shipping manifests, names, locations, it's all here. With this, we can take down the entire network." Mark stared at the papers, realization dawning. This wasn't just some random tip-off or routine bust, it was a major breakthrough. "How did you find out about this?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier doubt. "I've been working undercover for months," Marcus replied simply, avoiding specifics. "But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is stopping them." For the first time since their initial encounter, Mark felt a flicker of respect for Marcus, not because of his title or authority, but because of his dedication to justice. It reminded him of why he had become a police officer in the first place, to protect people and make a difference. Together, they devised a plan. Using Mark's radio, they alerted nearby units to surround the area while gathering enough evidence to secure an arrest. As reinforcements arrived and the traffickers were apprehended, both men worked seamlessly, their earlier animosity replaced by a shared purpose. When the dust settled and the criminals were in handcuffs, Marcus turned to Mark. "You did good tonight," he said, his tone sincere. "We couldn't have done it without you." Mark met his gaze, feeling a mix of emotions, pride, guilt, and gratitude. "Thanks," he replied quietly. "And I owe you an apology for everything." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the unspoken weight of the moment. "Let's talk about that later. For now, let's focus on making sure justice is served." Dawn broke over the waterfront. The two men parted ways, not as adversaries, but as allies bound by a night that had changed them both forever. In the days that followed, the bust at the docks made headlines across the city. Authorities hailed it as a major victory against human trafficking, crediting an unprecedented level of cooperation between local law enforcement and federal agencies. Behind the scenes, however, Marcus and Mark knew the operation had been far more personal, a pivotal moment not just for justice but for their own growth. For Mark, the aftermath was a whirlwind of reflection. He attended mandatory sensitivity training sessions organized by the police department in response to the viral video. At first, he approached them with reluctance, convinced they were nothing more than a public relations move. But as he listened to stories from colleagues and community members about systemic bias and its impact, something shifted within him. One afternoon, during a particularly candid discussion, a veteran officer named Detective Carter shared his own experience of confronting prejudice early in his career. "It's easy to judge others based on what you see," Carter said, his voice steady. "But real strength comes from questioning your assumptions and learning from your mistakes." Mark left the session feeling uneasy yet determined. That evening, he sat alone in his apartment staring at the framed photo of himself graduating from the police academy. Back then, he had believed he could make a difference simply by following the rules. Now, he realized that being a good officer required more than blind adherence to protocol. It demanded empathy, humility, and self-awareness. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own reckoning. After ensuring the traffickers would face trial, he finally revealed his identity to the public, releasing a statement through the FBI. In it, he acknowledged the injustice he'd endured but emphasized the importance of accountability over anger. "What happened to me wasn't right," he wrote, "but it also wasn't unique. My hope is that this moment sparks meaningful change, not just in how we treat one another, but in how we hold ourselves accountable." The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people praising his courage and resilience. Yet Marcus remained focused on the bigger picture. He reached out to Mark directly, inviting him to meet for coffee. It was a gesture neither man expected, but both needed. They met at a quiet cafe downtown, choosing a corner table away from prying eyes. For a while they sat in silence, unsure where to begin. Finally, Mark spoke. "Agent Reed." "Marcus," he corrected himself. "I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for the stop, but for everything after. I let my biases get in the way, and I regret that." Marcus nodded, appreciating the sincerity in Mark's words. "Thank you," he replied. "That means a lot. But I also want to thank you for helping me that night at the docks. We couldn't have done it without each other." Mark managed a small smile. "Funny how things work out, huh? If someone told me a week ago that I'd be sitting here having coffee with you, I wouldn't have believed them." They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, careers, and struggles. By the end of the meeting, the tension between them had dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. They weren't friends, not yet, but they were no longer adversaries either. As they parted ways, Marcus turned back briefly. "You're not a bad guy, Mark," he said. "Just keep working on being better. That's all any of us can do." Mark watched him walk away, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few months, he became actively involved in community outreach programs, striving to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. And though their paths rarely crossed again, he often thought about Marcus, about the lesson he'd learned that night at the docks. For Marcus, the encounter marked a turning point too. It reminded him of why he had chosen this line of work. Not just to fight crime, but to inspire change. As he continued his mission, he carried with him the knowledge that even in moments of injustice, there was always room for redemption, if people were willing to listen, learn, and grow. And so, two men who had once stood divided found themselves united, not by circumstance but by choice. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was proof that understanding could emerge from conflict, and that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. This final part ties together loose ends, emphasizing personal growth and reconciliation, while leaving readers with a hopeful and impactful conclusion.